Namaskaram, namaskaram. Yeah.
In fact, Makarand Paranjape, a great scholar, is the chief guest. Very session. Makarand is, in fact, a versatile person, and I always listen to him with great admiration. But particularly, he is remarkable in spoken English. His English is really fine. He is an orator, and therefore we welcome him and we request him to deliver the valedictory address.
Pranams to Sadguru Ma, pranams to Swamiji, and my deepest gratitude and pranams to the chair of this session, Professor Bhatt, who is a living legend for all of us in Indian philosophy, and we have followed him and been together in many conferences over the last several decades. So it's really an honor and a privilege for me to have you as the chair of this session. Thank you, sir. My deepest reverence also to all the great scholars who are here, and to the, I would say, extremely inspiring family of Sadguru Ma, and for my repeated opportunity to come here. I came here to deliver a talk a couple of years ago. I think it was Sri Pattabhi Memorial Lecture on Swami Vivekananda. So I want to take my cue from what Professor Godavarish Mishra said. We have all been enjoying the Daivi Sampad here over the last 2 days, and I see this as a defining feature of the kind of conferences that the Sri Vishnu Mohan Foundation has been organizing. Apparently, this is the 50th conference of this kind. So let us give Swamiji a big hand. But more importantly, let us also spend a few moments to plan how to take this great yajna forward, with your permission. Now, I also want to acknowledge Shri Vitthal Nadkarni ji. I'm his neighbor, and we've been having these wonderful conversations. So I'm taking a cue from one of these conversations, sir. And normally we begin with a Sanskrit shloka, but I want to begin with an abhanga from Tukaram. He says, Adhi hota satsanga, Adhi hota satsanga, Tuka dhala panduranga, Tyate bhajan rahina, Mula svabhava daina. So I will now translate, which is actually linked to our theme, Karya and Akarya. So he says, earlier it was satsang, like where we are today. We come here for satsang. Then he says, Tuka, that is Tukaram, Tukaram dhala panduranga. Tukaram became Panduranga, like Aham Brahmasmi. Then he says, but Tyate bhajana rahina. In spite of that, his bhajan, his singing of the Lord's name, has not stopped. Then he explains why. So he says, Mula svabhava daina. So his svabhava does not change. So I think that this explains in a nutshell the mystery of Karya and Akarya. That which is to be done continues prior to, during, and even after the realization of Brahma Vidya, it would seem. And I think, once again, this is something for us to reflect upon, about how to go from here. Now, what I normally do when I go to a conference and give a paper is try to give a gist in a sentence or two about what I'm trying to say, because as I grow older, I find that my own attention span has decreased. And unless yesterday Mr. Rajiv Balakrishnan was also saying that you have to be able to say everything in about 2 or 3 minutes, because if you can't, you've lost your audience. So, the gist of what I want to say in terms of my own thinking about this really complex topic, I'm going to say that right at the beginning. And of course, I'm taking my cue from the Bhagavad Gita, whom, every single speaker here has referred to, okay? Which is simply this: action cannot be renounced, okay? Action cannot be renounced, but the sense of doership should be renounced. But here's a little catch, because even doership cannot be renounced. The act of renunciation binds us back into the chain of action. So, doership should be recognized as an illusion. So, action cannot be renounced, but doership should be recognized as an illusion. Now, Sri Krishna himself says this in the Bhagavad Gita, and I'm going to come to that in a moment. But the real point is that most speakers here have spoken about action and have tried to understand the dynamics of action, ethical action, also from a Western perspective, deontology, communicative action. But very few have focused on the doer, on the agent of the action. And I think the great contribution of our tradition is to dissolve or take us to the point where the doer of the action can be dissolved. I think this is the great contribution of our tradition, Arsha Vidya. He doesn't like my saying Sanatana Dharma. Because in all the other traditions, as far as I understand them, even in the Western tradition, and here I want to refer to Dr. Paneerselvan's engagement with the West and its philosophical traditions, which is also important. I'm going to come to that. You're not able to get out of that agency, individuality. You're still trapped in the cycle of individuality. And I think that the wonderful thing about our tradition and our, Vedanta is that it can take us to the point where we see that doership is an illusion. And we can ask a subsidiary question, then why ahamkara? Because everyone has ahamkara, right? The identification of ourselves with this body, mind, or whatever other layers are, this entity. Of course, ahamkara has a practical use and utility. For one, it helps us maintain the body, so we can see the utility of ahamkara, but not its ultimacy, not its ultimate truth. It has no ultimate truth to give us. It has a utility, a practical utility. To that extent, that ahankara can be maintained. After a point, even that becomes impossible, but we'll leave it at that for the time being. And I want to come back to the point I began with, which is what makes this garland of this Shrikala, this garland of conferences so important and in some sense so vital to the bigger task of national regeneration. And I think that it is the presence of Swamiji in all the sessions. I bunked the morning session, bunked in the sense that I had something to do, but I was listening to all of you on Zoom whenever possible, but he has been there throughout. So the presence of a realized person is what makes a fundamental difference between the so-called secular conferences, which hundreds of them we have attended, academic conferences. They are merely cerebral exercises, It's all gymnastics of the mind. What is different here is that there is the basis of anubhava. And in fact, I'm now coming to the point where without anubhava, we should not even speak as academics. We may need to, because we have to earn a living, we have to build our CV, and we have to get promotions, and we, feed the numbers in our annual reports. But that is not the purpose of Indian knowledge traditions. The purpose is to realize ourselves and also then Abhyudaya, right? Shreyas and Abhyudaya. How do we serve society? So I think that what makes this conference chain or this conference, you might say series, different is the presence of Swamiji, the presence of learned people, but Anubhava, which is the basis even of the Veda, because the Vichar comes after the Anubhava, isn't it? Anubhava is the foundation. And then some Achara, it has to translate into benefit, you know. And here we must go back to the fundamental premise, I think, of our tradition, which is that we are already Brahman, we are already the self. It cannot be brought from outside, and everybody in this room is sure to be enlightened if they are not already enlightened. I mean, moksha, mukti, kaivalya, each one of us, this is a promise, it's already ours, okay? What remains is, in a way, the removal of ignorance. And ignorance is nothing but false identification, right? That's why I'm saying focusing on the doer is more important than focusing on the action. Who is it that is doing the action? Supposedly doing the action. And here, I mean, Krishna says it very clearly in the Bhagavad Gita. And first he says in chapter 3, verse 4, that one cannot achieve freedom from karmic action and reaction by merely abstaining from work. This has been quoted earlier. Nor can one attain perfection of knowledge by physical renunciation. He says it very clearly. So you can't stop acting, you know, because the gunas themselves, your pravrittis, everything will force you to act. And, you know, like in the morning, try to tell yourself, I will not get out of bed. It is very difficult. After a while, you want to get out. So something is pushing you out of bed. So tamas is very important because it lets you sleep. But then rajas and sattva and other things are forcing you out. So you can't stop acting. But then what does Bhagwan say? What does Sri Krishna say? He says that nobody, this is chapter 3 verse 5, nobody can remain without action even for one moment. Indeed, all beings are compelled to act by their qualities born of material nature, the three gunas. So none of us can escape from that. But then what is the answer? The answer is in 327. He says, all activities are carried out by the three modes of material nature, but in ignorance the soul, deluded by false identification with the body, thinks of itself as the doer. So he says very clearly, ahankara vimudha atma, aham iti manyate. Aham iti manyate. It's so beautiful. It's all stated clearly. So this vimudha atma, through ignorance and false identification, undergoes this chain of birth, rebirth, suffering and so forth. And that is all that needs to be done, as it were, if anything has to be done at all. But things have to be done, as I said earlier, and Swamiji said, let's reflect on how to take this forward. So I want to focus on, just for a few moments, on what I consider to be really the important achievements of this conference. So the first I've already mentioned, the presence of a person such as Swamiji directing this endeavor and guiding all of us and taking it to Abhyudaya. So I've already mentioned this, no need to repeat it. The second important thing as I see it is this so-called, I call it so-called, advisedly because I'm going to explain what I mean by it, the so-called interfaith angle. Now this is a very important thing. We saw in the beginning, in the very first session, okay, we had, Arif Muhammad Khan Saab speak, and he spoke so well. We were all witness to that. Such a learned presentation he gave, quoting from the Mahabharatas and the Shastras. It was highly inspiring. And the Consul General of United States, Judith Ravin, she represents the Abrahamic tradition, and perhaps she's Jewish herself. She spoke very well, as you know, too. And of course, the Consul General from Thailand representing the Theravada Buddhist tradition. We've had a number of scholars here who are Muslim, Janab Sahab who just left. Now this for me is really important because we have a tendency nowadays to be very aggressive in this Hindutva push, which is also important. I'm not trying to say that Hindutva is not important, but aggression is not always the best way forward. And we have to find other means and ways to include everybody. And we see that there's a great interest in our traditions, and all these traditions, the Arsha traditions that Professor Mishra spoke about, and meaningful dialogue is really important, isn't it? So when Ms.JUdith Ravan said that she talked about religious pluralism, religious tolerance, the freedom to practice religion, I also wanted to tell her that we must also respect the freedom not to be proselytized. That is also my human right. It is your human right to practice your religion, but it is my human right. See, when you have a telephone and people keep bothering you, you say, do not disturb. So we should have a right to say, please do not disturb. When I need you, when I want something from you, I want to learn about your tradition, I'll invite you. But this tremendous money, energy and political backing for proselytizing in the name of freedom of expression is I think an error in the understanding of what religious freedom and pluralism means. So I think a forum like this can give us that opportunity for a meaningful dialogue. And here is when I want to refer to something that was asked earlier by my younger friend. We have always looked at interfaith, that's why I said so-called interfaith, in terms of similarities. Aham Brahmasmi, Anhal Haq. Karya, Akarya, or Karya, or Karma, Vikarma, Akarma. I thought you would talk about Vinoba, sir. I'm going to come to that. There was no time. But we say, okay, haram and halal. We always try to think or say that all traditions are similar, essentially, but they are not. So there's a better way to do interfaith dialogue by talking about differences and incommensurables. There are some incommensurables. So when you say that the individual is entirely different from the divine and can never be the divine, that is an incommensurable, in philosophical terms, with Advaita, with Aham Brahmasmi. So there's no point trying to collapse the differences. We should simply say we respect these differences. But please, for us, it is halal to say somebody is a kafir, and then what the right hand gets, what to do with the things you've conquered with the right hand, what you've conquered with the left hand, what in Hindi we call a ganimat. So the history of desecration, vandalism, that is haram. So what I'm trying to say to us, what I'm trying to say is there is a very positive way of doing this interfaith, which I think when we move forward, rather than being aggressive Hindutvavadis, as some of us try to be, it is better to have an inclusive dialogue with an understanding of the differences, a respect for differences, and also drawing the line that what is not acceptable to us as a Hindu, as a Sanatani, a certain kind of proselytization is not acceptable to me. And it is in my interest and in the interest of my community and also in the interest of the nation, in my view, to have certain safeguards to protect people from this aggressive proselytization. And we don't want these very big powers to tell us, constantly poking us through their media and other channels that, look, allow this, change your FCRA so that we can pour in money and do this. And similarly, the aggression that comes from certain Abrahamic communities when they want to impose whatever jihads we are talking about, which I don't want to bring in these matters, but I don't think, what I'm simply saying, I don't think a meaningful interfaith dialogue can happen without also addressing these. We can't simply put them aside and say, oh, we have to be really polite, we only talk about dharma and ahimsa. No, we have to also address some hard questions. But I think that we have seen in this conference that this can be done very meaningfully, very peacefully, and in a manner that we can mutually understand and learn both similarities and differences. That's my point, okay? So this is my second point. Now my third point, Swamiji, is how to take this forward. And my humble suggestion is that we should now possibly do the next conference on a topic such as we've done, Karya and Akarya. Now we can do something like Karma, Karya and Kartavya, something like this. Oh, that is wonderful. So Kartavya, because we are talking about how Rajpath has become Kartavya Path. And so what is the Kartavya? What is the duty that is now required of us as a resurgent nation after, so many years of being in a very difficult state, as we know? And how can we all contribute to that? So I think that we should move forward in this series with a topic like what Professor Bhatt has suggested. And I think that this is a wonderful venue. You can't have a better venue than this. But perhaps we can go to another part of the country and look for a local partner, like a local university, look for support from ICPR. If I had been director of IIS, I would have right away, here itself, announced that the next conference we will host at IIS. But unfortunately, that's not to be. Asiatic Society. See, so this is a very good venue. So we need collaboration. We need collaborators, and other universities can also collaborate, and we can take this forward. But as long as you're present, and as long as there's a small committee with people like Professor Bhatt and others, so that the direction is given and it doesn't become a mere academic exercise. It should be more meaningful than a mere academic exercise. So that was my submission. Now, I want to refer to, now this is the second part of my paper. The first part I've already, finished, which is what to do from here. The second part is going back to the original theme and some of my few reflections. And here I want to bring in, just as we are talking about not just action but doership in all these different traditions. We've had wonderful, I think, papers on Mimamsa and the injunctive versus just the statements, descriptive, injunctive versus descriptive, right? So within the broader traditions of Sanatana Dharma, we need to, we've had some discussions, but we can possibly take this forward. For example, you talked about, Professor Mishra, how Shankara is always trying to cut Sankhya, isn't it? You just mentioned that. But Satkaryavad is also something that we can reflect on. Nobody here has talked about it. I'm not a professional philosopher. I'm a curious person. And I try to read and write a little bit. But Satkaryavad is also a way to show us that if the effect is already inherent in the cause, and if the first cause is Brahman, then everything that follows can be nothing other than Brahman. So there is nothing other than Brahman. So all actions, whether... Exactly, in that sense. So I'm saying this is one direction to explore this topic, in my view. That was one submission I wanted to make. But the other thing I wanted to also talk about very briefly, since time is limited, is how do we engage with the very robust tradition of Western philosophy, which we can't simply ignore. And those of us who are in the university are still in the process of decolonization. We haven't been fully decolonized. And I think that Professor Paneer Selvan has shown us some links and paths and ways to approach this problem. And I wanted to very briefly dwell on that. So when we look at this move, you talked about the linguistic turn as already being present in India. And it was not new. It's there in Nagarjuna, it's there in Diganag. So we've had the linguistic turn for a very long time, without question. But I think what's very important is in the last, let's say, century or half a century, or 75 years, the idea of the sovereign subject, the Kantian idea of the sovereign subject has really got eroded. First of all, Freud tells you that you're not a rational agent, your desires and your unconscious are determining your action. You think you're in charge, but something else is in charge. And then you talked about Derrida. I mean, you didn't mention Derrida, but I guess you mentioned the phenomenologist. You mentioned, but Derrida is also talking about the impossibility, in fact, of any signification. You started with this sign and signified, which in Sanskrit is always united, isn't it? Vagarth, as Kalidasa said. But he's saying the signified is always deferred. So you can never know what anything means because it's a play of difference and difference. But it results in the erosion of the sovereign subject. Then you have Foucault, once again, who says we are a product of all these institutional devices, you know, when he talks about the hospital and, social engineering, and he talks about bioethics and biopolitics. So the state and all its institutions and many other institutions actually control our behavior. That is what is being suggested. So once again, the idea of the sovereign subject, which is the basis of capitalism in a way, is being eroded. So where are we now? We are at a transhuman moment. This is the point I was trying to make. And philosophically, humanism, which was the post-Renaissance idea of the West, of the sovereign subject, capitalism as individuals, driving progress, all of this has now come to an inflection point, so much so that the uniqueness of the human is being undermined by AI. In fact, AI can produce better essays than most papers that we have presented. And I'll tell you, Swamiji, for teachers it's going to be a problem. You cannot give an assignment because AI will generate an answer for you. In fact, I don't have time to demonstrate it, but my very paper has 2 or 3 AI generated answers. You know, I was going to read them out, but there's absolutely no time and I don't want to tax your patience. Everybody's exhausted. And in fact, Shikhaji was saying we need an energy boost to listen to you now. Because it is very intense, I agree. And but we are academics. We must have the stamina to pursue the life of the mind. But what I'm trying to suggest, Swamiji, is we are at the cusp of another type of crisis where the future of higher education is really in a state of, I would say, uncertainty. Because critical thinking, deep cognition and fake cognition, it's going to be impossible to distinguish between fake cognition and deep cognition. And our entire tradition is based on deep cognition, as it were. So these, I think, are some of the directions to pursue when we take our discussions forward, right? And we must engage with the West, but I think this is the moment to show Western traditions that we have certain resources that can actually save them from the impasse, the aporia, the dead ends that they have arrived at, and the disintegration, as it were, of the social fabric that we see in the West. You know, the disintegration of normative behavior. So much so that if you go to cities like San Francisco, there is no police. And as soon as, somebody starts approaching a shop, they shut down the shutters and they put away all the things because people just come and take what they want and leave. And you can't prosecute them. So things such as Black Lives Matter and so forth has resulted in such a, should I say, reaction to the other extreme that a lot of petty crimes cannot even be prosecuted now. So there's a disintegration at a level that is almost unimaginable. Whereas in a society like ours, there is a natural, I would say, injunction against doing wrong things. Otherwise, the poor would have been stealing from the rich. But we don't see that. People are safe in our cities. They wander around. Except for liquor shops, you don't see bars on any store, People go, you'll be paid. So this is, yeah. So that's how you can buy a journalist in India. One bottle of scotch is enough, Unfortunately, with due respect to the present exception to the rule, we are not talking about you, sir. Forgive me if I said something that hurts you. So anyhow, now I want to conclude, and I want to conclude by going to science now. Because, Swamiji, we have been saying, in Indian tradition, in the Vichara Marg, what Ramana Maharshi also said, that when you say, who am I? If you ask that question and you take it to its logical conclusion, which has actually happened in my own case when I was 21 years old, the process of self-inquiry was very liberating for me, because it took me to a point where I arrived at this very, should I say, painful juncture where I felt that, okay, I've learnt a few things, I've understood a few things, but who is it that has understood and learned these things? The learning or the experience is only as true as the experiencer, and so it's all false. And the escape from this, as it were, prison house of the mind, was simply the very liberative experience, which is not to be captured only in words, is that there's no such entity as Makarand. So, in a sense, it's Anatmavad. There's no such entity. So, be fully relaxed. So, there's nothing that is going to attach, because there's no center of gravity to which everything attaches and then from which there is no freedom. Because even freedom can only be as true as the person experiencing freedom and so forth. And so that is a state where there's neither subject nor object, but that experience of oneness, I think, that is the Anubhava, which is the basis of Vedanta, in my view. So, I'm saying that Vichar Marg and this process that we've all embarked on together can actually save us from so much suffering. It can save us from the fear of death. It can save us from the fear of Punarjanma, and also the fear that we will lose our knowledge, we will lose whatever we have earned and have to go back to the nursery school in our next birth. And the fear that as our organs fail us, as we age, we will get unbundled and our self will get scattered and we will lose our essence. So all these fears, we are free from these fears. And if you observe a child, you will see that embodiment is happening before our eyes. They don't even know who they are. And only after a few months, if you say, who is Malini? Then she'll say this. She doesn't even know at the beginning who she is. So the self-other distinction doesn't even exist, right? And they don't know for a very long time that they are somebody separate from the mother. They are breastfeeding. They don't know for a very long time. So it takes a while for embodiment and ahankara to emerge. And similarly, the unbundling also has to happen. The senses will fail. But the fear of all this, the fear of process, vanishes. So we know that the self is not an entity through Advaita Vedanta. And perhaps the phenomenologists are telling us that the self is not an entity, the self is a process. But science, Swamiji, is now telling us that the self is not just not an entity, it is not even a species, because there are more non-human cells in my body than human cells. My microbiome, my gut is full of bacteria, viruses, and without them I can't exist. In fact, my feelings, according to science, are largely determined by the bacteria in my gut. Because these bacteria are sending signals of happiness, unhappiness, anxiety, satiety, even schizophrenia. Much of it is being driven by the bacteria in your gut. And these bacteria, through antibiotics, through the isolation of the human species from the other species, the way we have divorced ourselves from nature. So this you might say, this pool, this swamp of bacteria is reducing, and we are getting towards becoming monocultural. So, in a sense, our existence even as a species is threatened. This is what I'm saying. And it is, I think, our traditions of Arsha Vidya or Sanatana Dharma which can realign us, as the Vedas have taught us right from the beginning. They can realign us with both nature and supernature, so that the species as well as the planet can stop hurtling towards suicide and self-destruction. Because that is the path we have embarked upon. In fact, all modern biomedicine is based on isolating cells in petri dishes and using or trying to find that molecule which will act on that cell to cure that particular disease. But no cell exists in isolation with any other cell. No human being can exist in isolation from any other human being or any other form of life, or even material, non-living entities. Like the air we breathe, we talked about Ghatakash. This itself is a Ghata. So once I breathe out the air, part of my air that has been breathed out, you are breathing, and I am breathing in your air. So to think that you and I are separate is a complete illusion, because we are all not only interdependent and interconnected, but at the cellular and molecular level, it's a soup, without any demarcations. There's no way to demarcate where I end and this podium begins. It's impossible in science at the quantum level to draw a boundary. So I think Advaita is being proven in ways that we have not imagined. It is being proven that there is no isolated entity. When we say Isavasyam idam sarvam, it is actually a fact that we are all energy beings, and the energy is permeating the entire cosmos. There are no boundaries of a rigid and fixed type, and that's why Ahankar can only be at most a matter of convenience. So I think that the self is not an entity. The species is also, in that sense, the human species is also, the self is not an entity, but the self is not even a species. Because our species, human, Homo sapiens, whatever you want to call them, they are completely interdependent and interconnected with all other species. And therefore, the conclusion, and here I just want to bring in Vinoba Bhave for just a moment, because he gives a wonderfully different interpretation to the Gita in his theory of karma, vikarma and akarma. And I mentioned that yesterday in a question, but I think it's important to talk about the Gita at the conclusion for the very simple reason that the Gita has become the defining book of the Indian national struggle for independence. From Tilak, everyone, Gandhi, Vinoba, Sri Aurobindo, essays on the Gita, the number of commentaries, and then Swami Chinmayananda, there are so many, we can't even count them. Why? What happened? So, in a way, we don't want to be critical, historical, and get trapped in that Western mode, the historical critical mode, because we don't belong to history. We are really Akalis, We we are a self-centric civilization which denies the tyranny of time. So we are archetypal. We continue our yajna whenever and wherever the situation is conducive. So we replicate the conditions which were at the start of the cosmos, right? So we are not trapped in history, and we are forever free of time, and we worship time, Mahakala, and that is the freedom we enjoy as Sanatanis, I feel. So, but for the time being, talking about the historical critical method which tyrannized us from Max Muller onwards, the philological, the historical, the critical, and trapped in that, modern Indian academics has been, gasping for breath, Swamiji. But for a moment, see the shift from Prasthanatraya, where the Gita is elevated to as a source of knowledge, that knowledge which can lead to liberation, to bhakti, becomes an ancillary text to Bhagavad Puran, and then the whole bhakti movement as a way to save Sanatana Dharma. Only because you're so helpless, you have no arms, you don't even have knowledge because all the pathshalas are finished, all the schools have been destroyed. So between Naneshwar and Tukaram, what happened in Maharashtra? All the centers of knowledge were destroyed, including Paitan, which was Eknath Maharaj's place. So then what do you have? You still have Anubhava. That's why I started with Tukaram. Nobody can take that from you. You can steal your language, you can steal your institutions, your Vedas may be scattered, the Pothis may be burned, Nalanda was burnt and it burned for months. But who can steal your Anubhava, right? And who can steal your devotion? So we survived with devotion, and the devotion to Sri Krishna saved the civilization. And the Mahamantra was given, and instead of Rama and Krishna fighting, they included both Rama and Krishna, so both Tulsidas and Chaitanya can go in the same stream. But then what happened when the British colonized us? With Bankim, we started shifting from both a text of knowledge regarding Gita as a text of knowledge, then to a text of devotion. So Bankim says all this bhakti and blowing the conch and the beating of the drums and dancing in ecstasy is not going to help us. You have to do karma. We have to bring Krishna as the master of karma back to the center of the national consciousness. Bankim starts that, then Tilak, everybody follows that. And today we have this conference on Karya and Akarya. So I want to end with what Vinoba said. And so he says that normally vikarma is defined as that which should not be done, and karma is defined as that which should be done. But he says no. He says that karma is that which will bind us. Vikarma is that which we should do in such a way that it cuts the bondage of karma. The end result is akarma or anasakti yoga. So he gives the definition of anasakti yoga, which Gandhiji talks about anasakti yoga in his commentary on the Gita.
One of the very radical way of looking at the Gita.
I think so. So I think that
He said that karma, he defines it as a nice karma.
that's right.
And therefore, karma has a place. I wanted to speak about that. There was no time. Karma and vikarma makes a karma.
That's right. That's what I'm saying. The combination. So now let's end this. I'll end my own valedictory now. So karma is inevitable. Then how do you free yourself from karma? So again, the tradition gives you all these options. One is you surrender. You say Krishna Arpan Manastu, right? You surrender, you're free. The other is you do nishkama karma, right? So you say karmanne vadhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana. Now most people say renounce the fruit of action. I don't say that. I think what Bhagwan is saying is action, or all the things that you do in order to achieve a particular goal are in your control. The effort is yours. You can put in as much effort as you can. But the outcome is not in your hands. As they say in the West, man proposes, God disposes. So what Krishna is saying, what Bhagavan is saying, is why worry about the outcome? It's not in your hands. It will make you terribly unhappy. So when he says you don't have adhikar on the outcome, what he's saying is the causation or correlation between the effort as the cause and the fruit as the outcome is so mysterious in a world of infinite causality that to be free, you forget about the outcome but keep putting in your best. So that's another way to be free, that you do your effort and don't worry about the result. Then the third way, you do this, you do lok kalyan, you have nothing to gain, you just keep serving other people. There's a wonderful, story of Ramana Maharishi. There's a shepherd boy, who wanted his cane. So he goes on the Girivallam, and on the path he takes a branch, then he strips it, he smoothens it with some leaves, and when he comes back from the Girivallam, he has this stick for the shepherd boy, that here's your stick. So that is also a kind of karma yoga. He's demonstrating, a jnani is demonstrating how to act in the world. So I feel that we have had this privilege of coming to this wonderful place, this ashram. You have given us hospitality, Swamiji, and guidance. I'm deeply grateful to you. We all want to join your yajna so that we take this forward, and in our traditions, we move towards the right action, which is so important, the kartavya, to build this country. And as we all know, as Sri Aurobindo said, India rises not for herself, she rises for all, she rises for humanity. So I think the time has come for us to shed this knowledge of Bharata, the Prabhasa, and the knowledge of our traditions which can liberate us, all of us. It's for everybody. It's not sectarian. Everyone knows that Sanatana Dharma is not sectarian. It's absolutely for everyone. It's an invitation. So under your guidance, I hope that we can take the series of conferences forward to different parts of India, maybe abroad, and act like true karma yogis as Sadhguru Ma taught us. Thank you. Thank you.
Narayana, before the vote of thanks, I just want to say a few things. One is that, all the presentations were very enjoyable, and it is all a grace that it happened. All this case came out of a small conversation during COVID. I had gone to see Mr. Musa Raza, and we were talking about what is permitted and what is not permitted. Then I said, let's have a small gathering, even if it is COVID, we can have it. Then it went on to the back burner, and then with Sadhguru's grace, we have been able to. So I want to just acknowledge his help in this matter. He is a great devotee of the Bhagavad Gita, and he had also written 16 points and sent it to senior Muslim leaders, saying that if those points are corrected, there will be no problems between Hindus and Muslims. It wasn't accepted.
Did we have a copy?
I don't have it, but I'll ask him. So that is how he said that if those points are addressed, then there will be no issues between both communities. So that is how this idea came about. And like Professor Bhatt said, this Karya and the karma can be split into various subjects which can be discussed, and he said karma and responsibility, and you point out kartavya. So then we'll have the next one possibly in November. I don't know when Sadhu will, what her plans are, but possibly then. So I just give the mic to Sripati.
Permission, I will make one very brief comment. I think Makarandji has a living metaphor when he talked about the Bhagavad Gita's importance and the connection with Anubhava. The most beautiful example of this is Sant Gyaneshwar's Bhavartha Deepika on the Bhagavad Gita, after which he asks his master, he says, but what about your own Anubhava? So Amruta Anubhava. And after that, he takes Sajiv Samadhi, and within 13-14 days, Nashta Maharashtra Rashtra. So then the regeneration through Eknath Maharaj physically entering into the Samadhi and sitting in front of the master, and to do the Vishuddhikaran of the purification that we talked about. So all these resonances are what we need to share and expand and explore and connect with rest of our beautiful nation. Thank you so much.
Very good. I'll also say something. One little thing to that,
Then I will say.
So I'm glad you brought this up, and I know everybody is very exhausted, but I just want to say one little thing. You know, we are in the middle of these history wars also, you know, what to put into a textbook, what not to put in. But to me, they are almost entirely inconsequential. Why? It is not syllabus reform that will bring about a renaissance in India, because all this information is easily available. But there is a real history of India which is not even told. This, for example, what Mr. Nadkarni just told us, how Eknath Maharaj went to the Samadhi of Sant Gyaneshwar in Alandi, what he got from there. So what I'm trying to say is the real story of how this Sanatana Dharma survived. That story has not been told. We only have some glimpses of it. But that story needs to be told. And for example, how did Indian music survive? Not just in the south, which was not fully conquered, but in the north. It survived because many great musicians, including Tansen, who converted to Islam, they had to convert for whatever reason, they maintained these traditions. And then gave it back to the Hindus. For example, which happened in the 20th century, when some of the greatest ustads, including Fayaz Khan, Abdul Karim Khan Sahab, Bismillah Khan, they all had Hindu disciples, many were even Brahmins. So how did the art survive? So obviously there was a great collaboration. So to demonize somebody will not help. So what I'm really trying to say is that the survival of this parampara is a miracle, and the history of that survival, whether it's in thought, arts, literature, poetry, philosophy, there are 1,000 stories to be told. And rather than day in and day out fighting over whether Savarkar should be in the syllabus or should not be in the syllabus, if people devote their time and energy to some of these projects, to unearth the facts, to unearth these stories, document them, and let everybody know what happened. So these will be micro-narratives which will add to I would say, a mega-narrative of how this society survived, including how Jagannath survived, even without arms. So what happened when you're under attack? What happens in Apadkalin Dharma? What are the resources of the tradition? And what are the responses when you have overwhelming strength imposing upon you something that will destroy your very essence? How has this tradition responded? These stories need to be told and curated and presented and celebrated within or outside the syllabus. So the task is immense, and we shouldn't waste our energy, as we are doing in social media, in building so-called ecosystems which are echo chambers, because they are devoid of creative thinking or critical thinking. So sorry to have taken up more time, but Exactly.
We are thinking about curing.
Exactly. Healing is more important than reiterating the pains and hurts and traumas.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there is a very small story of how music was taken from Maharashtra. Amir Khusro makes a request to Alauddin Khilji that there is a international treasure that I want from Maharashtra. And that international treasure's name is Gopal Naik. He travels in a bullock cart where all the bells are tuned in Sapta. He is the originator of the tradition. Kirana Gharana Mool Purush was Gopal Naik, imported from the Devgiri Darbar after the conquest of Maharashtra, and he was taken to the Amir Khusro court. And there, because he was a great Ekpati, he hid under the Sultan's throne and copied the Tan of, Gopal Naik to make it appear as if he already knew it. But in essence, he knew that he was really better than anything else that they have heard. And this is preserved in Muslim paramparas also. Gopal Naik as the Mool Purush of Kirana Ghara. So,
this Jnana Yajna to its fruition, in which there were many ahutis, and the final ahuti was made by Professor Makarand Paranjape. His presentation, scholarly one of course, is interspersed with many seminal ideas. Most important one is that we have not to renunciate karma, but we have to renunciate the egoity, that I am the karta. Of course, we are the karta, but a distinction is to be drawn between niyogya karta and swatantra karta. We are not swatantra karta. Though ahankara vimutata karta aham iti manyate, but we are only niyojya. We have been made by prakriti to act, because without we can't remain inactive. Our prakriti will compel us to act. So we are all niyojya karta. We are all actors in this cosmic play, and we have our distinct roles to play. And this is a very important idea that he has thrown, the importance of karma. A karma which should lead to wellness of the cosmos, hit, goodness. He has also rightly pointed out that we must have knowledge of what is to be done, how it is to be done, why it is to be done, and in how it should lead to the culmination or moksha, nirvana, whatever name you may say, perfection. So all our endeavors should be on to perfection. So this idea of perfection is also a seminal concept of Indian culture. So we are thankful to you, sir, for your very brilliant presentation, and we hope that the knowledge that we acquire gets translated. It does not remain in the air. This translation part is very important, and in the Bhagavad Gita, therefore, you have jnana, but jnana is culminated in karma, and karma is to be performed with devotion. So this samanvaya of jnana, karma and bhakti, well, that has to be there. Well, if we do that, then definitely we can make a distinction between karma and akarma. Akarma is something to be avoided because it may be detrimental to wellness, and karma is to be accepted. But karma has to be in the form of nishkarmya, wherein you do the action but don't care for the phala, the consequence. This is what also he has pointed out. So this idea of nishkarmya is really very much significant, And that's why we have Nishkarma Siddhi by Sureshwara. So, this Nishkarma is Nishkarma means action without any abhimana. Without any abhiman. So how we can have renunciation of abhiman? That's the main thing. And for that, Sankaracharya has proposed sadhana chatushtaya. So if you follow the path of sadhana chatushtaya, well, we can overcome abhimana and have the nishkarmya siddhi. In performance of karma, there should be feeling of akarma. That I am not doing it. I am just made to do it. I am not the agent. Someone is else in the cosmic planning. Well, I am an actor only, and I am doing it. You have to twice referred to the word illusion. But see, at the empirical level, it is not an illusion. At the empirical level, it is a reality. I am completing. So, we should therefore make a distinction between the vyavahar and paramartha, and make vyavahar leading to paramartha. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. The writings are in existence.